Live from the Washington, D.C. area, all empowered citizens need to know about intelligent use of resources, smart governance, inclusive communities, smart industry, and healthy, thriving urbanization. This is Smart Sustainability, the TV talk about shaping a sustainable future in the digital age with Nicolette DeVidar. Welcome to Smart Sustainability. Seeing the world differently, without physical eyes that is that the true art of seeing? Can we tap into untapped areas of our brain, see like bats, make our minds more elastic to see a whole new world? Can human echolocation not only make the world accessible for the blind, but also open up the eyes for the rest of us? Our topic tonight, good evening, thanks for joining us. I'm Nicolette DeVidar. What you see is what you get, so the saying goes. By definition, that leaves out a population of about 13% of adults in the United States who are either blind or severely eyesight impaired, according to the NHIS. Nature, though, shows us seeing without physical eyes is possible. The bat does it, dolphins do it, whales do it. There's a lot we can learn from bionics. It shows us that there is a different navigation system accessible to us that opens up a world beyond our physical eyes. It also shows us that the world is a lot more interconnected than what the physical eye can see. Echolocation is the magic word. So meet the man who sees like a bat, known as the real Batman, Daniel Kish.
Toddler echolocation.
You can find stuff like that at stationery stores.
Oh, okay.
And the chain, they have those at hardware stores, and you get them in any length with any number of clasps, but you can do different things. I've used twist ties, I've used, cable ties, anything that will attach to anything else.
Ellie likes this one, Bo.
That's just an example. The thing is, with echolocation, you're scanning more, so you tend to see more. Good for you. You tend to see more head movement. If you're looking for a corner or for an alcove, a recess.
Well, I can make a great bubble noise.
Nico.
Into this bowl. Ah, there you go.
You want to hear the echo?
Here we go.
Echo.
There
Yeah,
it is,
it's
echo.
Not quite the Batman you thought he was. Daniel is a learning pioneer. He's the world's human echolocation expert who does absolutely amazing things. And if you've ever questioned that we humans can create out of ourselves everything we want to be, I invite you to check out what he does. Despite being blind, he goes biking, hiking, visits places he has never been to. He's the first totally blind person who's a legally certified orientation and mobility specialist. The epitome of self-efficacy and self-mastery. And it's not a unique skill. Daniel says everyone can learn it. An Ashoka Fellow and pioneer of self-directed learning, he founded World Access for the Blind, an organization that teaches the blind to see the world differently and become completely self-sufficient and independent. I'm thrilled to have him on as a guest tonight. Welcome, Daniel. It's great to have you on.
It's my pleasure. Thank you. Now I have to live up to that introduction.
I think once we check you out, you've already lived up to it, so we can go to the dialogue. So you're an expert of human echolocation. Let's start with that. What is that?
Well, echolocation is a process of seeing with sound, which sounds a bit cliche these days, but essentially it's using reflected sound instead of reflected light to image one's surroundings. So a demonstration I often like to do is just this simple demonstration of, if I make a sound at this cabinet here and I move toward it and away from it, you should be able to hear the difference as I move toward and away from the cabinet without me actually changing the sound that I'm making. So if I do this, and then if I do something like this, so if I make the same sound, but I move past the edges of the cabinet, right. So essentially that's it. I mean, those who become proficient at it obviously become more sophisticated, but that essentially is the basics. The basics are essentially edge detection and distance detection and positional detection. And with that, you basically have a lot of the functions that the visual system affords you.
That's good. How long did it take you to learn that, Daniel? Because that sounds like a very sophisticated technique to me. How long did it take you to learn it?
I pretty much learned it, I think, more or less in much the same way that sighted infants do. I was probably about maybe 15 to 18 months before it became obvious that I was using sound to find my way around. I lost my second eye at 13 months, my first eye at 7 months. My vision was very, very much depleted by that time. So I was probably developing skills like this even before I lost my second eye. And of course, I was quite young as those infants were that you saw in the initial clips. Mm-hmm. What I was essentially doing with those infants was auditory training, mm-hmm. To help them prepare to be able to learn these kinds of skills.
Yeah.
I mean, usually it develops. We're talking hours or days. We're not talking weeks, months, or years. So the student I'm staying with now, I'm actually speaking to you from their basement.
Yeah.
I came to see him for the first time a year ago, and I mean he started making clicks and finding his way around the very first day of our training, and then the other day, yesterday we went bicycling. The day before we went bicycling. So
already?
It's yeah. I mean that was a year ago, but I mean we were bicycling a year ago too. So I mean I took him to places he hadn't been to before, some schools that we decided to learn, and we learned part of it by bicycling around and part of it by walking around. And the idea is that you can teach yourself new places, new areas, new territories, you really just by listening and by using a bit of strategy.
Yeah, but let me ask you something. So you were obviously, you were blind as a baby, so you never really knew the difference. How did you get into this? How did you discover this type of navigation to be able to conjure images in your mind? Did you have a teacher?
No, I didn't have a teacher. Well, I did have a teacher. I had my parents. So my parents valued my freedom, they valued my autonomy, they valued my ability to be able to relate to my environment and to get around my environment comfortably and securely on my own terms. And they didn't approach me with a sense of limitation or doubt or concern. And I think I picked up on that as an infant and just became very comfortable with the process. I mean, you throw in a little bit of natural talent. Not every student has natural talent, but it's been our experience that every student can improve their ability to get around comfortably and securely, notably. I mean, very, very obviously.
So how would you define natural talent? I thought everyone can learn that, but how would you define natural talent? That?
Everyone can learn it, but it's a bit like learning music or learning a foreign language. There are some people who have a natural talent for music, right? But most people who learn music, who learn to play an instrument, don't necessarily have what I would call a natural talent. They have the ability to learn. Yep. And then there are some people who go on to play at Carnegie Hall or Buckingham Palace or whatever. I mean, there are people who will excel because they kind of have a leg up or a boost. But almost anyone can learn to play music, and almost anyone can learn a foreign language. So almost
I would
anyone can
dispute-
learn,
I
almost
would
any blind
dispute
person
that.
can learn to get around comfortably and securely.
Yeah. But you do need, so some have easier access to it than others.
Yeah.
Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. But I don't think I've met anyone who just couldn't do it.
Yeah. So describe to us a little bit what you actually see. How does it work? So when we talked, you explained to me, so you, instead of using light waves, you're basically replacing light waves with sonar waves.
I have heard it described by blind people who have seen it at one point in their lives as being like a three-dimensional fuzzy geometry. So you have surfaces, you have position, you have distance, you have density, so depth of structure. You can kind of tell whether something is solid or sparse. You can tell if something has a lot of texture or if it's smooth, and you can tell contours. You can tell the general form factor of an object. So between and among all of those qualities, you can paint a picture in your mind not only of individual objects but whole scenes. So we have demonstrations of a couple of us, blind individuals, who will walk into a place they've never been to before, walk around it, clicking around, determining what objects, items, elements, features, surfaces, and then actually do a sketch of the area to show that there actually is an image happening in the brain. And then, of course, the brain scan research that we've done, which actually shows the visual cortex at work. So if you shove people into an MRI scanner and you do functional imaging, you can see that the visual cortex is quite hard at work processing all of this information.
That's amazing. So some people say that seeing beyond the physical eye is the art of seeing. Would you agree with that?
Art,
in a sense
science,
that there is more than what the eye sees?
The seeing really happens in the brain.
Yeah.
The seeing is a neurological mental process. Images occur in the brain. An image is really the brain's way of communicating between the conscious mind and the outside world. So it's all a matter of how our brain makes those connections neurologically.
Now, when toddlers learn that when they're young, I can see that when you've been blind from a baby on, basically, I suppose the way you learn the sonar vision is kind of like you learn a language when you're born, or when you learn something else. Is there a difference to when you go blind as an adult, for example, and then you have to learn it?
I think maybe both learn it. I think that the main difference is in how the imaging system, what I call the imaging system in the brain, is applied and or co-opted and or constructed. So the imaging system of a congenitally blind child, who oftentimes is kind of facilitated through their world. They're often guided through their world. They're often taken, moved through their world, supported through their world, what have you. And that support isn't necessarily titrated very much as they get older. So they're accustomed to being shown what to do, told what to do, etc., guided around what to do. So in that case, the imaging system doesn't necessarily develop in the same way as it would for a sighted child, who is accustomed to seeing what's around them and directing themselves to interact with what's around them. So for a congenitally blind child, their auditory system may be quite developed, but their imaging system may not be well developed. And so it's up to us to help them to develop that imaging system and then tie it into the auditory system. Whereas for someone who is blind later in life, the imaging system actually works fine. It's just that it needs to be connected to the auditory system, and then that auditory system developed. So, so in the case of someone who's congenitally blind, it's developing the imaging system and tying it to the auditory system. In the case of someone who's blind later in life, one might say that it's a matter of developing the auditory system and tying it to an imaging system that is already functional.
And this is something that has to be trained, right?
Well, it doesn't, it has to be experienced. I didn't receive training myself. So, there are a small percentage of blind people who develop skills like this and to this level on their own by virtue of, I would say, what was expected of them and just what their experiences afforded them to do. Kind of like there are some kids who learn one language, there are some kids who learn multiple languages. It just depends on what they were exposed to and what they were expected to learn. So there are some blind kids who develop skills like this if they are expected to and are motivated to learn it. But those who do not, then yes, the training that we provide has a lot to do with direct training of the child, but also, and as importantly, training of the family and of those surrounding the child, those who have influence over the child.
What do you find usually is the biggest challenge when you work with families and you provide this kind of training? What do you think is the biggest threshold to overcome at first?
Probably fear, doubt, apprehension, lack of understanding about blindness, what to do with blindness, what to expect of their child. A lot of it's often cultural. But different cultures are different, and different people react and respond to their cultures differently. So I'd say a lot of it is just the biases that we hold against blind people. If you think of bats, every bat learns to echolocate. Every bat learns to get around in total darkness.
And they are unbelievably fast.
They are unbelievably fast and accurate.
Every time I'm just totally, the speed is just unbelievable.
Right, it is unbelievable, and they're very, very good at it, and they have to be, and every single bat is raised to be. And blind people can do this. They can learn to do this. We've done this over and over again. We've worked with thousands of people who've all learned to do this, but it's just not expected. It's not supported. These kinds of skills are not supported to develop in the same way in human culture as they are in bat culture. If they were, then every blind person would learn to do this pretty much without fail.
Are they not supported because it's not so much well known yet? In other words, because we're more stuck in conventional thinking in terms of feeling pity with people who are blind, in terms of thinking that someone is incapacitated and therefore cannot do certain things? Or is this just because there is a certain way of how we approach learning and what's expected, and we're stuck in the rut, so to speak?
Well, it's all of the above. We're still learning a lot about how to teach children, and we're still learning a lot about what learning models work the best and are most appropriate and are the most effective. We still have, sighted children who are incapacitated by their parents, right? And so it's kind of how we are comfortable approaching a certain population, whether it's children, whether it's blind children, whether it's sighted children. Of course, there are also cultural variations. I think a lot of it does have to do with the newness of blindness in our culture. So it's only been within a generation or two that blind people were even allowed out by themselves. This is a fairly new thing. I'm 55 years old, and I was probably one of the first generations in the US to be, to be mainstreamed in regular schools. And so it's been within my lifetime that huge shifts in our culture, in our society, in the US have occurred. And so there's just a long, long way to go in terms of how we understand blindness specifically, and how we understand learning and the human brain and the human condition generally. We're still really cutting our teeth on all of that.
Yes, we are. I actually do want to play a second clip and show a little bit more of what echolocation looks like and how children take to it.
Where did it go? Where did it go?
I love that laugh.
Where did it go? There it is. Here it is.
Can you get it?
Can you get it?
There you go. It's a corner? This is no corner.
Yeah, the sound goes far, it goes open.
Yeah.
It's open, and then if we face the corner, it sounds maybe like a bowl closed in.
Mathieu Bjerke har tatt initiativ til å lage en norsk organisasjon som skal fremme teknikken.
Luca.
Ja.
Treåringen bruker ekkolokalisering til en viss grad allerede.
Even though he's only 2, Ethan is already learning the basics of seeing with sound.
Show him what you're doing, that it's a tray. What we first want to do is excite the auditory perception, excite the auditory sensitivity with these funny exercises with containers and trays.
If he can be positive and have confidence, and if you know, it can start with his dad and I instilling that and allowing him the space to find it, then he's, what's he going to be doing when he's 18?
Or better yet, what won't he be doing?
10-year-old Ethan from Bonnybridge in Scotland contracted bacterial meningitis when he was just 10 weeks old. At 6 months old, doctors told his mother that his illness had taken his sight. His mother believes Ethan's blindness has contributed to him being musically gifted.
He would stand at the piano for hours, really, and push keys.
The click's important because if you click, like if something was there, you'd hear something coming back to you.
Now where's the path?
The next day it's Ethan's birthday and time for another challenge. A hike in the hills with his family. Observing Ethan's progress is Professor Gordon Dutton, who first diagnosed him.
Ethan will stop at obstacles instantly before bumping into them. He knows that they are there. His whole behaviour shows that he too is echolocating.
I don't actually see with my eyes, I just see in a different way. So that's the advantage about being blind. And you can read in the dark as well.
When you see Daniel do it, for me, that makes it believable. It's something to hold on to, and it's hope. And it's something that his whole life benefits from. Happy birthday. Love you.
Playing Claire de Lune, the third movement of Suite Bergamasque by Claude Debussy. I'm saying that as if I know what I'm talking about. This is Ethan.
Isn't that absolutely amazing to see what those kids actually can do? I find this just absolutely stunning. Now, Daniel, when you look at all of this, what is a key? Is there like a key framework? How do you make this accessible for the kids?
My approach is really to focus on the student as being the center of the instructional process. So I try to understand how the student is learning and how the student is processing information, what is important, what is relevant to the student. Of course, I come in with an expectation on behalf of the student of what of really what to expect of them. Kind of treating them as they could be, and kind of holding that bar quite high, but at the same time taking the lead from them in terms of how they reach for that bar. So, so
the learning occurs actually within themselves. You only facilitate it.
Yeah,
Is that what I'm hearing?
I think of myself as a facilitator of learning, more than a teacher.
Yeah.
And so, in Ethan's case, I mean, he directed that process a great deal. He had a very unique way of learning. He was much more auditory than than many of our students, really, than most of our students. Very few of our students become world-class concert pianists, so that's one thing. So he directed a lot of that process. A lot of it is in the early training. We try to start working with our students as early as possible. So infants, toddlers, if it were up to me, I'd start working with them as newborns, not in terms of, the whole super baby philosophy, but just in terms of helping to position the neural system to learn skills like this in much the same way that we all do with language and with movement and with other expectations that we have for typical children.
And it's a very playful way of learning, right?
That's the basis of it is that playful orientation, because that is what's relevant for children in particular, is playfulness, is lightheartedness, is feeling comfortable and natural about directing their relationship with their environment, with the world around them.
Now, when you start working with babies, for example, or toddlers, you work a lot with families also. Is there a role for you in guiding families to helping deal with that? Also in managing their own fear, in learning to let go a little bit more and become more trusting? And trusting in a sense that the children, they can literally see the world in a different way.
Yeah, so a part of it is showing them what is possible. So helping them to understand and adopt what I call a blindness perspective. Instructors who are blind or instructors who understand blindness in a positive way. And many instructors don't understand blindness in a positive way. And so we try to make sure that blindness is seen as a condition rather than a disability per se. And so the other part of that is we actually put parents through some of our training. So the parents actually experience using a cane, using echolocation. The parents start to see quickly what it is that their children are becoming able to do. So, and it tends to happen quite quickly. So that the process is usually, I would say, fast-tracked. They tend to fast-track through that process. Pretty quickly. It's nice because we often work with children in larger blocks, so blocks that are 2 and 3 hours long or 4 hours long or a day long in some cases, and then we try to compress that training in 2 or 3 days to start with, and then follow-ups as needed. But the idea is that we see the process of learning unfold in real time, and it tends to get people quite excited. And we also try to involve as much of the extended family, friends of the family, immediate community as we can get our hands on, so that everyone is really kind of on the same page as regards the process and how to support that process. The key really is that with sighted children develop their industry, their capacity to operate in the world through a process of systematic or strategic withdrawal of support. We instinctively, some more than others, but we instinctively withdraw support from sighted children in a systematic way, and so that encourages sighted children to do as is needed. Need being the thing that drives learning and drives development. They do what is needed. They learn to walk on their own and run on their own, and do all the things that we need to do. And with blind children, that process is often kind of broken or usurped in such a way that this withdrawal of support doesn't happen. So the children don't necessarily experience the same drive to develop these processes for themselves.
Yeah. So now I find it tremendously courageous that when you think about that people who are blind, they go on bikes, they go hiking, they go to places they've never been. Is it fair to say, is there generally a different relation to fear among blind people that you've noticed than among sighted people that use physical eyesight? I'm really curious on that one.
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on what they are exposed to. I would dare say that people who are adapted to blindness, people who are comfortable with blindness, tend to have neutralized fear of the unknown. I regard fear of the unknown as being man's most primal fear of the dark, fear of the unknown, right?
Yeah.
And so I think it's man's most primal fear, and I think it's at the root of most fear that we experience.
Yep.
And I think that if you've adapted to blindness, if you've become comfortable with that condition, and if you've kind of mastered your way through it, then you've really kind of mastered that fear. That you you develop a whole different relationship with fear of the unknown, and the unknown becomes much more of a puzzle than a thing to be feared.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I mean, people who are blind are, when they move around and they do the things that they are often, regardless of being fearless. In a way, that's true. What's really kind of happened is they've just neutralized that fear of the unknown. It's just not a threat to people who are blind and who have adapted to blindness, I would say.
But isn't that at the very heart of self-mastery? It is really overcoming that fear of the unknown, in feeling comfortable in going with the flow, in being comfortable with the self.
I think it leaves the door open for that. I think that people who have learned this in their lives, be it from blindness or from other conditions, not only have opened that door to what we could call self-mastery, but have also extended an invitation to others. There's a lot to be learned from that process, and from people who have found a refinement of that process.
Yeah, let's talk about this for a moment. Because so what are things? Because I think the way I'm looking at this, if this is really at the heart of self-mastery, it is about extending the vision beyond the physical. It seems to me that everyone could benefit from this type of learning and also from this type of seeing. Share with us a little bit your experience in terms of what you've noticed, what really is applicable to others. What can we take from that?
For one thing, it tends to inspire a lot of confidence and inspiration in others. And it's not just an inspiration of ooh, ah, look at what you can do.
Yeah.
The important thing isn't so much look at what you can do. The important really is in reevaluating what we ourselves can do when we find ourselves in the face of someone who has met a challenge, who has adapted to a challenging condition of some kind. So we've been asked, requested, invited to provide this kind of training to more mainstream applications, corporate learning development, leadership development, sensory development in communities, school assemblies for sighted children, things like that. And what we find is if you take a sighted person and you run them through a program like this, they don't necessarily come out the other end mastering echolocation or mastering use of a cane or whatever, but they do come out the other end with a completely different relationship with their world, and with a lot of creative adaptive processes in their brain open. So there's a lot more blood flow happening. There's a lot more of self-realization happening in terms of, well, the blocks and the barriers that we sometimes put up in our own heads are shaken or challenged, or in some cases just gone, and then you have a whole new realm, a whole new frontier to explore. And we sometimes have people come to us who've seen one of our videos, or seen one of the segments that have come up. We've had just embarrassing amounts of press coverage around this. So there's a lot of stuff. In fact, just yesterday, I was with my student at a park that we had biked to, by the way, and the woman was watching him moving around the playground and doing his thing, working, moving around the other kids. It turns out the woman is a dancer, and she had done blindfold dancing, but when she heard one of our pieces on NPR, this was some 5 years ago, she actually taught herself to echolocate. She taught herself to be able to tell the difference between to know where the bodies were in the dance room. She does contact, what do they call it? Contact dancing. And so there's a lot of physical interaction, but she became so much more comfortable in her own space and so much more comfortable teaching other people to be comfortable in their spaces. And that was just a random, really just a random stranger that we encountered at the park. She knew who I was. She knew the term echolocation. She knew exactly what we were doing.
I have one question though on this also. When you echolocate, you must get a different sense of perception or perceive things more, how they're more interconnected, because you're more aware. I think it happens on a different level as well, doesn't it? So is it fair to say that when you echolocate, it increases your perception all around you?
Well,
more so than just trusting your eyes.
So echolocation is a it's a 360-degree perception. So you do hear what's behind you, and you can hear to some degree what's around corners and things like that. But I would say that the interconnectedness, I think that echolocation facilitates that. I think it has a lot to do with how people connect the dots. We're all dealing with data points. We kind of think of reality in terms of a smooth flow of perception because vision gives us that illusion. But really it isn't. It's just data points. It's all data points. And I think that echolocation can help people shift their perception into how they connect data points differently, how you can interpolate better, how you can interpret better, how you can establish associations among data points that other people might miss.
Exactly, because you see beyond the physical. And I think very often when we see with the eye, you go with face value, and we learn more and more that there is so much more to it than
beyond
just
the surfaces.
The face value, in essence.
Yeah. There's a lot there. There's a lot, and it has to do with once you kind of jettison your fear of the unknown, then you are, I think, more free to reach beyond what is obvious, or what seems obvious, I should say, to reach beyond what seems obvious, to draw deeper and potentially more meaningful associations among the elements that are surrounding us.
Yeah, because you go through a gate. How would you characterize, what is the difference between learning where the self is the center, so more about self-revelation, where the self, so to speak, leads the teaching and the education, to traditional thinking and how we often apply education in general, where there's someone on the outside who just tells you like what to think?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's the saying is kind of teaching children how to think and not what to think kind of thing. It depends on what outcome you're looking for. Some would argue that public education was about teaching people what to think. It was about reifying cultural values and things like this. But if you transcend that and you see children in a different light, where you value that self, where you place primary value on that self, then you're more about teaching people how to think, and now you're looking at people helping to facilitate and foster that creativity and development. I think of it in terms of a constructivist education model, where you're helping to draw out learning. You're not pushing in learning. You're not pushing in information. You're not pushing in an agenda. You're meeting children on their page, whatever that is, and then you kind of invite them to various places, or you accept their invitation to various places, and you keep meeting until you exceed yourselves. You keep meeting until you step beyond yourselves. I mean, anyone who's worked, for example, with an autistic child, almost has no choice. That child's not going to move. If you try to drag that child kicking and screaming into your reality and your agenda, you're going to be dragging a child kicking and screaming for the rest of your life. They teach us how to work with them. The greatest findings, the greatest evolutions when it comes to autistic children, we've discovered by really letting them take the lead in that process.
But isn't also this self-leadership in learning, and if you look at the new world, this modern world, this new world that's emerging, I mean, at the heart of it is a self-paced learning, which is very different from the traditional learning that we used in the industrial time, where you had the kids, they were all put in the same mold, everybody had to learn the same stuff, you were told what to think. In this new world, we're realizing all the things you just mentioned before, which are at the heart of your learning methodology, really are exactly what people are finding more and more is really at the heart of what we need to go into the 21st century and to advance.
Yeah, value in diversity, and also a value in meeting of the minds. I mean, leadership is no longer about, leading from on high. It's no longer about, do what I tell you. It's not about top-down management. It's about collaborative management with the realization that as we put our heads together, we can all figure out where to go.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's certainly the way it has to be with children to a large extent. We put our heads together with our students to figure out together where we're going and how we're getting there. It's, I think, one of the things that makes that challenging or maybe apprehensive is that I think people are reluctant to give up some perception of control.
Yeah.
And you just have to put that aside. That's just another ego construct. That's just another fear of the unknown thing. Giving up control is this: I'm afraid to give up control because I don't know what's going to happen when I give up control.
So
find your way through. You find your way through what's going to happen with someone.
Yeah.
And that's a whole different perspective. It's a very exciting process, actually.
Yeah, because it comes right from the self. You basically bring out or create from this tremendous creative resource that we humans are, you literally bring out, you create out of yourself what you can be. And I think this is probably the key for the future if we allow this. But that, of course, also would means you have to let go of the control with that, as you said.
Well, there's no point in reinforcing the same thing over and over and over and over again. I mean, we're all tired of it.
Yeah.
So it's just time to move on.
That's right. So what role, let's talk a little bit about the self. Because obviously when you work with the self a lot, what role plays the self, and how important is it for children, or let's put it this way, how does an injured self play into this whole learning process or this constellation? Or a wounded self, I guess is the word.
Yeah, most of us are injured, most of us are damaged, most of us are dealing with each other who are also injured and who are damaged. I think so one thing that I'm very conscious of when I'm working with students is not to shove my baggage onto them, not to shove my damagedness onto them, is just really to try and put that aside and not identify with my own damage anymore, and just look at what's in front of us. So what's in front of us is newness. It's let's go somewhere. Let's do something. Let's do something new. Let's do something different. Or if it's the same thing, then let's do that same thing differently. Let's see what we can discover. So a lot of it's about discovery. So when we went to the park yesterday, we went to the same park that the family has been to before, but we did it a very, very different way. We had the mom put a cable tie on the back of her bike, and it's one of these things, and she just put it in her spokes, and her son, who's blind, rode behind her with this thing making a noise, and then I rode behind him to make sure that he's okay, and then his dad rode behind me. So we had a caravan of two blind people and two sighted people riding their own bikes down the street, down these roads until we reached the park. Yeah. And then, so, I mean, they'd never done that before. that was the first time we've ever done that. And it was very exciting, and everyone thought it was fantastic, and they want to do it again, and they want to, try it in different ways, and so it's one example of many that we do. Ethan taking that hike, same thing. It was going with the family, he and his cane, and going on his own, and it was to help him become comfortable navigating his new school, which was going to be happening, in another few weeks.
Yeah.
So it's embracing the newness, it's embracing the unknown, not with fear or from fear, but with interest, from an attitude of discovery, an attitude of let's see what lies beyond.
Yeah. Which I think it makes it so compelling and so interesting. Now I have a practical question for you, Daniel. When you go riding a bike, for example, and you make the clicking sound, is making the clicking sound on an ongoing basis? I imagine you have to build sort of a muscle for that as well, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's done with the tongue. Yeah. And most of us use our tongue a lot. Maybe too much, in our lives. So most people are able to develop that muscle very quickly.
So when you go,
Yeah, I was going to say, there are click languages. Remember, there are languages where people use clicks as part of the language. So it becomes just a completely natural process. And the strategies around clicking, sometimes you do it very softly, sometimes you do it more loudly, sometimes you do it less frequently, sometimes you do it more frequently. It's just a matter of what your activity and what your environment requires.
And I presume you adapt to this with experience, right? When you experience the distances, when you experience the more refinement of it.
Sure, that's right. In different activities, different experiences, different conditions. Now,
when you go to kids, what is the normal average time that you go to a family or to work with a kid? Are we talking a few days? Are we talking a regular period of time, of set times of when you meet? How does this work?
It varies so much from family to family. We've been to over 40 countries, and every situation has different parameters. I guess I would say it's nice if we can get, 3 to maybe 5 days to start with. It doesn't have to be 5 days, but 3 days is a nice amount of time. And then there's a lot that's learned in that period. And then what we often find is maybe a year later, we come back for another 2 or 3 days. And then, kids develop and their situation changes. And so their environment changes, maybe their schools change, maybe they move to a different community that has different parameters and that sort of thing. So it sort of depends on what they need. We try to adapt to what students need and what their families need. With this student where I am now, this is my second visit. My first visit was 3 days, and this visit will be 4 days, but it's been maybe, kind of 4 or 5 hours per day.
That seems very little to me, though. When you think about 3 days, what seems to be you almost learn an entirely new language or new way of functioning. You access a different part of your brain. In 3 days, that seems very short to me.
It does happen remarkably fast. If you think that the visual system for sighted people matures over a period of 20 years or so, if you think of how much toddlers have to learn, how much young infants have to learn, and how many mistakes they make as they're learning those things. It is actually quite remarkable how quickly a blind child learning to move around on their own really does develop.
Yeah. Now, just to clarify,
it makes me think that the process is already intrinsic to the human brain. To me, it's more a matter of activating the hardware rather than designing and creating the hardware. I think it's all there in us. I think it just has to be triggered and activated.
Yeah, that makes total sense. That makes total sense. But even then, I'm just saying, like three days seem remarkable, quick to do. But that also sounds is that something, your methodology, when you go out and you teach that, can you scale that? Can other people then become teachers or coaches? I guess coach is probably the better word, right? Versus teacher or facilitator?
We have worked with other blind people to teach this. We have had families share what they've learned with other families. We've had other organizations spin off of our organizations. So we have organizations in Norway and Germany and Canada and Australia and other countries working to develop their organizations. It's kind of become kind of a Johnny Appleseed sort of a movement where different people in different regions have worked to catalyze a similar process in their region.
Now, your organization is called World Access for the Blind. Did you come up with the name?
We came up with the name. It was 20 plus years ago that we all put our heads together, those of us who came together at the beginning of time, and really a painful process of wrestling through what should the name be, what should the logo be, what should the mission statement be. It's all not for the faint of heart.
Well, but neither is to become totally self-sufficient.
No, similar idea. And a lot of the curriculum development, a lot of the program development, all of that has just been, it's been a labor of love, and it's been an evolving process. I mean, even to this day, I go back into my writings and I tweak this and I add to this and I refine that. I mean, I have a textbook out, which is the first textbook called Echolocation and Flash Sonar. And it's about the kind of core principles of our approach codified and documented, and it's already very, very much in need of a second edition. So it's an evolving process.
Now, when you go to families or you go to children or even working with adults, do they sometimes tell you what they like to be able to do? For example, does everybody want to know what it's like to ride a bike? Or are there some that say, I really would love to learn how to climb?
Most aren't even really that interested in riding a bike. Most just want to feel comfortable in their own skin. They want to feel comfortable in the world around them. I worked with a woman from Australia. I went out for a whole week. She raised money to bring me out to work with her for a whole week. She was 38, and prior to my visit, she'd never really been out of her house on her own. She'd always had friends or family with her. And she just wanted to be able to do things on her own time, on her own schedule. I mean, she would have been happy to be able to go to the coffee shop on her own, which she was able to do that probably by the third or fourth day of our training. But more than that, not long after I finished working with her, her husband came down with a very serious illness, and the timing was perfect for her to really be able to have to step up to the plate and really start running those errands and really start doing that shopping and really, really step in to, support him in and through his illness. And she had two kids, a younger one and a young teenager. So so it was a real life metamorphosis for her.
Now, you said before it's not for the faint of heart. Now, that brings up another point. I know we talked a little bit about that. Perhaps blind people, because they learn to overcome more the fear factor, so they more comfortable with the unknown. It seems to me when you talked about it's not for the faint of heart. So when you look about entrepreneurship, doing something, doing a business or whatsoever, which is also not for the faint of heart, is there a correlation? Do you think that maybe people who have mastered echolocation have more tuned into or adapted to this entrepreneurial talent that we have, that actually all have, but we don't bring it out so much?
I mean, the answer to that question has to be really interpolated, because there aren't enough people who've mastered echolocation who've then gone into a situation like that. But I would say, I would answer the question a little bit differently. I would say that those people who are social entrepreneurs, who have that entrepreneurial spirit, probably have in common a different relationship with the unknown. They probably have neutralized a lot of their fears around, don't if yourself, don't get stuck in what if or if only. you just move forward. And when you stumble, you kind of figure out what that stumbling block is or was, and you keep moving forward. So I would say that if we answer the question from that direction and from that perspective, then yes, one might expect people who have mastered this process of kind of neutralizing your fear of the unknown have set in place one of the foundations, one of the perhaps most important foundations behind entrepreneurship.
Yeah. Now, where would you like to see, we're almost at the end of the show actually, where would you like to see echolocation go in the future? If there is something you could share with our audience, what would that be?
Ideally, I'd like to see an academy develop. I'd like to see an academy that's really focused on this process of self-development, not just through echolocation, but through this different way of seeing things, this neutralization of fear of the unknown. I think if we neutralize fear of the unknown, we set in place a lot of processes around things like empathy, things like mindful action, things like, you know, embracing diversity. All of that is fraught with potential fears and apprehension of the unknown. And when you put that aside, I think we just open ourselves up as human beings.
And that was so...
in terms of human relationships.
That's right. And that was so timely because the time we go in, that is about navigating the unknown. Thank you so much for coming on, Daniel, and for sharing that with us. Thank you so much for watching. And as Daniel said, be invited to actually try to navigate the unknown. And you can also go, of course, to World Access for the Blind to find out more about how to see the world with different eyes. And we will see you next week. Have a good night.